Hey everyone, welcome back. We are in grade 6. This is unit 7 and we're on lesson 8. So we're going to step away a little bit, kind of how our book does. They have us doing one thing and then we take a quick quiz on it and then they kind of turn the direction on us a little bit. So now is the time that we're going to step away a little bit from the direct comparison of the ratios and the rates, and we're going to start learning about percents, which are very much related to ratios and rates. So I don't think I'm going to give you the impression that they're not related. But it is a bit of a different topic to start thinking about. And so today's lesson is an introduction to percents. So we're going to be talking about money. Well, we're not really actually always talking about money, but money really helps us understand percents. So we know that this is a dollar, and it's kind of the ones in the money system. So this is the one whole thing. But we also know that you don't have to only spend a dollar. You can spend less. So you can spend less than the whole thing. Well, that helps us understand percent. So I've got all these pennies here. So we're saying we have this much money out of a dollar. So how much money do we have? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We've got 14 cents. Do you hear that connection? Have you ever wondered why we call pennies cents? It's because cent, C-E-N-T, means 100. So when we're talking about something amount out of a dollar, we're talking about what that is, 14 cents. But that also brings us to per cent. So per cent means out of 100. So the per part means out of, and the cent part means 100. So think about other words that you know that have the word cent in it, like century, 100 years. Centipede, well, they don't actually have 100 feet, but we think of it as 100 feet. What about centennial? Maybe you've heard of that. Centennial is the sort of the celebration when something reaches 100 years. So there's lots of like parks named Centennial Park, something like that, like a town has a park for 100 years and they name it Centennial Park. So centennial means 100 years. Or maybe centurion. Maybe you've heard that word, sort of from Roman times. It's kind of like a leader, a captain in the military who oversees, you guessed it, about 100 people. So all of those start with that prefix cent, and it means 100. So now that you know per cent, out of 100 means out of 100, does it mean that you actually have to have, in order to do percent, you have to have 100 of something? The answer is no. Percents are very much like fractions in that you have to be able to cut it into 100, either physically, like bars, you could cut into 100, or sort of theoretically, you could cut it into 100. Like time, you could actually cut time, but you could talk about the percent of time that you spend doing your math homework, the percent of time you spend doing your reading homework or playing on your device or whatever it may be. So percent means out of 100, and it means we're going to cut something into 100 pieces like fractions. So that's, again, where our money comes in, because it means 100 is representing the whole thing. So just like this $1 is representing the whole, one whole, and these pennies, these cents, are the parts. So let's talk about how we could talk about this amount of money out of a dollar. So we counted it and it was 14. Okay, I'm going to tip this down so we can see it a little easier. There we go. Now, so we could say we can see the money here, although it's a little hard to see the pennies on the table. Sorry about that. So it's 14 out of 100. We could say that. We could say it's 14 1/100ths. That would be a good way to say it. We can also say it's 14%. And this is the percent sign. It has two little circles diagonally, and then it has a diagonal line. Now, this has to be drawn the right way. You can't say, well, I just drew the numbers, the line going the other way. No, just like numbers, you can't say, well, I just turned my 4 around. No, that's not how percent goes either. So percent, how the shape, the symbol goes is top right to bottom left is the line, and then two zeros or two little tiny zeros, tiny circles on the top left and bottom right. Now we could also write this 14 per 100. That's another way we could write it. Or we could even write it as a ratio, 14 to 100. Every time we're talking about the 100, remember, that's the whole thing. So when we're talking about anything with percents, oops, I just threw my marker. Hold on. All right, when we're talking about percents, 100 is always the whole. So that's really important to know, that it's always out of 100. 100 is the whole thing. Okay, so you might say, well, okay, great. So percent out of 100, the number of things out of 100, great. But how does that actually show up in real life? Like, when would we ever use this? So you hear percent all the time. If you turn on the radio, if you look at something on the internet, they're constantly talking about maybe sales. You're going to go and buy something and it's 10% off. And you want to know, okay, how much am I going to save? Or you might use them in sports. Your coach might say, we're looking for our players to have free throws roughly in the 80% range. Like, you need to make about 80% of your free throws. And so you say, well, okay, but I don't know what that means. What is making, I mean, I have to make 80 free throws? No, it's not 80 free throws. It's 80 out of every 100. So it's a way of talking about a fraction of the free throws that you make compared to the free throws that you attempt, like in a game, how often you go to the line, and then how often you make your shot. So it also can be used to talk about sections of something. Now, the reason I have this, does this ever happen to you? Maybe you're the one who makes something yummy in your family, or maybe your family makes something yummy, and you go away and you come back, and what has happened? Someone has eaten a chunk of whatever it is that you've made. So this happens in my family all the time, and I know it happens sometimes in others. So if this also happens to you, you might want to say, wait a minute, how much did they eat before I got to do whatever it was I was going to do with it or whatever? So here's my pan of chocolate chip cookie bars. And what if I said, I want to know what the percentage of chocolate chip cookie bars that were eaten already is. So I would have to, in theory, cut this set of chocolate chip cookie bars into 100 and then see which parts were gone. How would I do that? Well, if it was a square, it would be easy to cut 10 by 10. This pan isn't a square, so that would be a little harder. So I might have to do 20 across by what down? 5. 20 times 5 is 100. So I'm going to do that and then hold on and then show you what that's going to look like, because we want to know out of 100. Now, these are going to be kind of tiny. Normally, you wouldn't cut a pan of bars like this into 100, but that way it's easy for us to figure out what parts the missing parts are, so we can figure out what part has already been eaten. All right. Phew. Oh, phew. That was hard. I tell you what, cutting bars into 100 is hard. I don't think bars are supposed to be cut into 100. Now, there they are. There's 100 pieces, or there would be 100 pieces if some hadn't been eaten. Now, the key to remember is they're all equal. You can tell if you look that they're not quite all equal. It's really, really hard to cut something into 100 equal pieces, especially when it has chocolate chips in it, and it kind of turns the knife. When you hit the chocolate chips, it kind of bounces the knife left or right. So say that these are all equal, 100 equal pieces. Now we can easily see how many are missing. Down here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So we have 2 rows of 17. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Then we have 3 rows of 13. So all we need to do is add 17 and 17 and 13 and 13 and 13 to find out the percent of chocolate chip cookie bars that are still available. Okay, so we did the 17 plus 17 plus 13 plus 13 plus 13, and we got 73. So how we're going to write that is a few ways. We're going to write 73%. So the amount of brownies that are left, or not brownies, cookie bars that are left, 73%. Remember, we can also write that over 100, like a fraction, 73 out of 100 pieces. 73 hundredths. When you hear me read it like that, 73 hundredths, how else can we write it? Hopefully you're saying we could write it as a decimal. We can absolutely write it as a decimal. And I'm glad that you're thinking about writing it as a decimal, because when we use calculators to calculate something, it'll only give us decimals, whole numbers and decimals. That's only what calculators give us. But sometimes you're asked to calculate something and give the percent. So you might say, well, it gave me 0.73. Does that mean 0.73%? And the answer is no. This is 73 hundredths. 73 hundredths. And percent means out of 100. So it's 73 out of 100. So it's 73%. So we write 73%, and the calculator writes 73% with decimals. That's tricky, but we'll keep learning about it. And then don't forget, we could write it as 73 per 100 or 73 out of 100. Now, if we know how much is left, we maybe want to know how much is eaten. Especially sometimes if we're doing something like this and we're looking to tattle. Has everyone done that? Where you're going and finding your adult to say like, hey, so-and-so ate all my brownies, or so-and-so ate too much of my cookie bar or something. You might want to know how much was actually eaten. So pause the video and see if you can figure out how much was eaten. If there are 73 left, how are we going to know how many pieces they ate? Well, we have to start with 100. Remember, even though we didn't see the whole sheet of cookie bar, we know that when we're talking about percent or percentage, it starts with 100. And we know that I cut these into what would have been 100. So how are you going to figure out what's eaten? 100 minus 73. Now, once you know that number, see if you can think about all the ways that you could represent that number and use this as a guide. Write it using a percent sign. Write it as a number out of 100, like a fraction. Write it as a decimal. And then write it using the word per and using the word out of. Pause the video and do that, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so hopefully you found that she or he, whoever did it, had eaten 27 pieces out of the 100. So it was 27%, 27 100ths written as a fraction, 27 hundredths written as a decimal, 27 per 100, 27 out of 100. Now you might be saying, that is so confusing. Why do we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Why do we have 5 ways to talk about this? And the answer is we just do. If you think about ways to talk about anything in our language, we often have multiple ways to express it. If we're feeling excited, we don't just have the word excited. We have elated or happy, or we can think of lots of words that kind of mean similar things. In fact, in literacy, you probably talk about that, about synonyms, excuse me, words that mean the same thing. We have the same in math. Sometimes there are just multiple ways to talk about the same thing. And 27%, 27 out of 100, 27 hundredths, 27 per 100, and 27 out of 100 are all just different ways. Now, you can say, okay, well, I know one, so I'm good. I got it. The answer is no. Just like you've heard me talk about before, you need to have multiple ways to think about something because you might use them in different contexts at different times. And different things work better in certain situations. And they also can help you solve problems better in certain situations. So you actually need to know how to do all of them. There's one more thing that you need to know, and it's estimating. Because if you are going to try to talk to the person who ate the chocolate chip cookies, you might not necessarily tell them 27%. You might go to a fraction or a percentage that's kind of a standard one, like one that we use all the time. So you're going to need to know what it's close to. What is 27% close to? Well, I hope you say it's close to 25% because that's a very, very common, it's kind of a benchmark. We call it a benchmark. 27% or 27% is close to 25%. And what's the fraction that we talk about that's 25%? What's 25 out of 100? So that fraction is 1/4. So if you go talk to someone, likely you would probably use 1/4. You'd probably say, "Hey, you ate a fourth of my chocolate chip cookie bars because before I could do math." It wouldn't be exactly right because it really was 27 hundredths. But 1/4 is really a lot easier for us to think about, and people are more familiar with it. So it's not only important to know all of these ways to talk about, it's also be able to tie them into those important benchmark fractions. And we'll keep talking more about that. We got one more thing to talk about, and you're on your way. All right. What if someone gives you a picture or you come across something that is not cut into 100? There's not really an easy way to recut it into 100, and you still have to talk about the percentage out of 100. What are you going to do? You're going to have to figure out chunks out of that 100. So let's do that with this picture. So sometimes cornbread, if you've ever had cornbread, they cut it into triangles. Why? I have no idea, but it's a very common shape to cut cornbread into for whatever reason. So if this was a big pan of cornbread and we had cut it into 4 triangles, how could we go about figuring out the percent that each triangle made up? Well, let's take a look. First of all, the whole pan is cut in half here. So if the whole pan is cut in half, that means this half of the pan would be 50 out of 100. 50% would be this side of the pan. Well, the same goes for the other one. The other side would also be 50%. 50 out of 100. Now, we don't actually have to cut it into 100 to know that. We know that the whole thing is always 100. We always say the one whole is always 100. Even if part of it's missing, like it was in the last example with my chocolate chip cookie bars, the whole thing still started out as 100. And then we ate some. Someone ate some. So here, this cornbread is still, the whole pan is 100. Each side is 50. Now what? Well, hopefully you're saying you can cut a rectangle in half, either the hot dog way or the hamburger way, but hopefully you're remembering that you can also cut it diagonally and it's still half. We could take this piece of cornbread, flip it around, and it would match that piece. So this 50% has been cut into 2 pieces. What is 50% cut into 2 pieces? Well, think back to money. What is 50 cents cut into 2 coins? 25 cents. So that means that each of these pieces is 25%. There it is. We didn't have to cut it into 100 to figure that out. We just had to know that the whole thing is 100, one whole is 100%, and then figure out it's cut into 4 equal pieces. So what would 4 equal pieces, when they put all together, what would equal 100? And it has to be 25 plus 25 plus 25 plus 25. I hope this is helpful. See you next time.